Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hooligan Report. It's our last episode of the season, or part one of our last episode of the season. And I'm joined by Cooksen.
Hello.
And I'm also joined by Jd2010.
Hey there.
So it's been a pretty interesting season, I would say. Pretty unexpected one in many ways, with both the clubs that got relegated, Newcastle and Aston Villa, long-standing clubs of the Premier League, and also the champions. I mean, Leicester City crowned champions would not have been a title that we would have expected to see at the start of the season. So what were your thoughts on the season as a whole, Cookson?
Well, again, there were some unexpected things.
That sound seemed to summarise United fans' feelings of the season.
No, that'd be falling asleep and snoring. But yes, unexpected season. I mean, you got Leicester again on top, Tottenham Hotspur having a pretty decent season, and again with the recently promoted clubs, two of them having relatively decent seasons, and also West Ham proving that they're elevating themselves to another level, try to get consistent European football.
Do you think maybe that's sort of the theme of this season, was that sort of improvement from the lesser teams? So, as you say, I mean, Watford and Bournemouth had really unexpectedly good seasons, but you also had Southampton, West Ham, and then obviously Leicester and Spurs also outperforming expectations?
Southampton have been steadily improving, so perhaps it's more now them getting to standard level, kind of where Everton was a few years ago. But again, they've improved massively, but on the inverse, you could say that the big clubs, they've gone backwards at an alarming pace. I mean, Arsenal was stagnant for most of the season. Man City pretty much had half a season, then again were zombies. United were boring, and Chelsea, they didn't really have a season that they'd be proud of.
How did you see the season, JD? Obviously Spurs exceeding expectations, but then ultimately falling short of the title, which, as the season progressed, I guess became the not expectation, but the hope.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy season for us and kind of for the whole league, really. Just Chelsea's season and Leicester's season. If you said that at the beginning of the year, what would happen? Yeah, people would have just laughed at you. So, yeah, I don't know. It was just kind of like Cookson was saying, the top sides dropped off at an alarming rate, but then those sides like Tottenham and Southampton and West Ham really took it up as well and closed that gap. So, and obviously Leicester too. So, yeah, it was a fun season to watch, especially probably a bit more fun for me than Cookson, because United one were pretty boring, but two were one of those sides that didn't exceed expectations. It would have been frustrating for a lot of those other teams, but for the neutral and Spurs fans and just general football fans, was quite an exciting season, I'd say.
Do you think the success of Spurs, Leicester, and also Southampton to sort of pluck, I wouldn't say obscure players, but lesser-known players from clubs for decent deals, and actually have that as as building their season and actually building their squad around those sorts of players, do you think that will sort of influence the way that Premier League clubs recruit players going into the future, or do you think that was sort of a one-off sort of event where these sides did so well, and with Guardiola and Mourinho and so on back in the league next season, that they'll just go back to throwing money at players?
I definitely think they'll throw money at players, but I think there's no longer a clear big four. You've got Liverpool as well, who are going to improve, you'd think, and Southampton, West Ham, and even someone like Stoke have signed probably 4 or 5, fantastic players that next season are going to be even better. It starts to become a top eight sides and Leicester as well, like 8 or 9 sides that really wouldn't surprise you if next season they made the top 4. It's just about getting those Payet signings or Dele Alli. You don't have to go and sign like City did today. That got Gundogan from Dortmund. I think I said it right.
I
But
think that's got to be the one of my favourite ways a player signing has been announced was his tweet to Man City saying,
yeah,
"Come on, announce it, announce it."
yeah, it was quite interesting that it seemed like a done deal for days, but it seemed to take those last little bits took a while. But yeah, like he'll probably be a great signing for them. But Payet and Kante and Mahrez and Ali, they're not going to be looked at by those top clubs, and they're all team of the season quality players. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes next season. I think the gap's getting massive from the mid-table English clubs to say that mid-range, Italian, French, Spanish sort of teams. But yeah, it's just going to be a lot harder to stay for Tottenham to stay in that top four because you've got about 6 or 7 teams that could definitely knock us out.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming so competitive. I was about to bring you in there, Cooksen, as a supporter of United. Do you think that there'll be that sort of status quo resumed next season? Do you think United will sort of recruit well enough to push back up into that top 4?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, if the virtue of just getting Mourinho is enough. I mean, the side we have now is better than our last 2 title-winning sides by far.
In what sense? Surely your defence is quite weak at the moment. Midfield's a bit underwhelming.
Vidic was good in 2011, but he was injured mainly from pretty much from September 2011 onwards. He was half the player he was. Rio got old. We had rotations at right back and Evra at left back. He was quite old. Midfield, we had Michael Carrick and a 50-year-old Paul Scholes. So again, it's just man for man, the squad's improved, but it's just how they're done. Like, managing makes such a big difference, as Leicester have shown. And with signings, I mean, I would say it's now harder than ever for mid-table clubs in the Premier League to get those cheap signings, because the Premier League, TV deal, suddenly those 10 million players will turn into $25 million players.
Yeah,
but
they can afford it now. I think there was that article saying 16 of the 20 richest clubs or something like that are now Premier League teams.
But I understand Cooksen's point. Are you saying, Cooksen, that if you want to look at those players overseas, the clubs will sort of hold out for more money from Premier League clubs?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. I mean, it's happened to United all the time. I mean, a player goes, we go in for a player, suddenly the price is, £10 million more than what's normally happening.
And it was what happened with Spurs when they were selling Bale, that they actually tried to do the deals and bring in the players before they sold Bale, because of that theory that if clubs knew that they had £100 million behind them all of a sudden, they'd hold out for a lot more money in the deals.
Yeah, the thing with signing like Kante and Mahrez, it's not just scouting a guy who's done brilliantly and has impeccable stats, and everyone knows, we can bump this guy's price up. I think the scouts saw enough in those guys and Dele Alli that they just thought he can become something even more. So you're not signing a guy that 5 or 6 teams are after. You've picked out a target that suits a need, and you just go in there with the offer, and it tends to work.
It reminds me a lot, though, of in Moneyball. I read the book a couple of months ago, and it was similar in that, where he would talk about the fact that after a while, opposition coaches or clubs would sort of see him coming, and as you say, I mean, if Spurs are picking out the Dele Allis and the whoever's from all of these clubs, Kieran Trippier or whoever it is, eventually it gets to a point where the club goes, oh, well, hang on, if Spurs are interested in this guy, he must actually be pretty special, and they can still sort of recognise that interest.
Yeah, but then you get, like, in Dortmund's case with Gundogan, once the contracts start to wind down, that value drops off, so it's kind of maximising, you got to sell at a point when they've got years on their contracts as well, so they can't be too picky and think, we'll just wait for a bidding war, because 2 years later that guy could be a flop like a Soldado or something, and it was just at that point they could have got 15 million, and 2 years later they're stuck with him. So Yeah, I don't think there'll be too many. Like Stoke spending 50 million on a player next season because they spent 20 this season on William. Was it no? Who'd they get? Was it Carvalho,
No,
the midfielder? Oh,
oh, jeez.
Imbula.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's it. Imbula.
Imbula.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think a team's going to like, oh, Stoke could spend 20 that year. They will ask for 40 this year. It's just, I don't know. I think they're just becoming so much richer than the rest of the world that teams are going to look at it and think, oh, let's cash in now. Let's take our money now. Because you got to remember, a lot of the clubs out in Europe, they actually are struggling financially.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So when they do see, a decent offer, it covers them. Because a lot of those mid-table Spanish clubs, French clubs are actually, not rich like a West Ham are, or a Stoke, or even a Newcastle. So I just think the whole league's just going to keep getting stronger and stronger with that. It'll be tough because, like Cooksen's saying, Mourinho's going to be a much better manager than Louis van Gaal was, and they looked like they should have, on paper, been a title contender this year. So he doesn't have a heap to do. Then the same with City. You'd think Guardiola was going to make them better again. So, it's going to be a tough season for all the teams.
The thing is, though, with transfers, I've noticed is that, essentially, Ali went pretty early in February, didn't he?
It was January, I think, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, now big clubs are now going to go for more young signings and then turn them into world class. Essentially, as soon as the Martial deal went through, that's changed the complete scene for transfers, in my opinion, now. Because suddenly, teenagers and young 20-year-olds...
But he was a Champions League player. Like, that was everyone knew who he was before Man United got him. But someone like Kante was playing wherever he was in mid-table French side.
And I think Mahrez was second division French side, wasn't he?
So there's going to be those examples like even Sterling, for instance. He's known. He's played Champions League. He's played national. If you're signing a 19, 20-year-old with all that, you're going to have to spend a lot of money.
Well, just on that topic, then we'll bring it to the topic of best and worst signings for the season, and I'll put it to you, JD. Who was your best and who was your worst signings of the season?
Obviously, Kante's probably going to be the obvious choice, but close second would have been Alderweireld. That turned, I think we had the second or third worst defence in the league, and he was the main defensive signing, plus moving Dyer back, and he was just fantastic. And he was fantastic at Southampton the year before. But Kante I just couldn't believe how he actually was improving as the season went on. Like, he was surprisingly good at the beginning, but just kept getting better and better. And by the end, you saw all the memes and stuff all over Facebook, and he's just a fantastic player. If they could find another signing or two like him next season, there's no reason they can't stay up there.
And what about worst signing?
Worst has got to be Depay.
Thought you'd go there.
He's just thinks he just seemed to think he made it by signing for United. Seems like a very confident individual, and it backfired, and he didn't show any kind of hard work to get it back on track. But maybe Mourinho could see him clashing, but he could maybe get the best out of him. So, but for this season, he was probably the worst.
How about for you, Cooksen?
I'll probably say, Alderweireld. I mean, there is a dearth of good centre-backs in the world at this moment.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, let's be Kante was good, but midfielders, again, you're going to get good defensive midfielders, but good centre-backs, and for under £12 million, it has to be him. Yeah,
that's true, actually. There probably are a few more defensive midfielders out there that could perhaps do, be Premier League team of the season. But yeah, I couldn't think of too many other centre backs that we could have signed that could have got us in that spot.
And how about for West signing?
For a United point of view, it would have to be Memphis, because it's not that he just got destroyed of all confidence, which is quite bizarre. That and he bulked up too much.
Yeah, he did look a bit large.
You look at his footage from PSV days, he's just so much more slimmer, more agile, but now I think he become too big for the Premier League. He needs to become slimmer, a lot better. Overall, worst signing. Probably have to be half the Aston Villa side, but that's
you stolen my line. I was going to go with half the Aston Villa side, because when you consider how much was Depay? Was Depay 28 million or something? 30 million?
22 million or something like that. Rising to 28.
When you think the amount of money that Depay cost relative to United's budget compared to some of those Aston Villa players relative to their budget, they were just shocking signings. I think, is it Guy?
Yeah.
Have you pronounced it?
He cost them quite a bit, didn't he?
But he would have been just about their only decent signing, because I can't remember who it was on the board who compared his stats to Kante's, and he actually outperformed Kante in quite a few stats. But apart from him, you think Traore from Barcelona cost them, I think, 8 or 9 million, and I think barely played. Ayew looked okay, but some of their
I didn't mind. I thought he was not too bad. But
Ayew was okay. But
Lescott was I don't even know if he was a free transfer, but yeah.
I think he was a free transfer from West Brom, or 2 million from West Brom.
So you're a bad signing if you're a free transfer and you're a candidate as worst signing.
Yeah.
The other one I think was pretty ordinary was Stephen Naismith going to Norwich.
He scored.
But not so much for his performances, but that was just such a crap transfer for him to make as a player.
Yeah.
I thought maybe the contract was massive, but God,
do you reckon he might go to Rangers or Celtic? Do you reckon he'd look to Scotland?
He'd want to have a clause in that contract for a relegation release clause, because it makes no sense why he'd go from, Everton were, lower mid-table, but Norwich just did not look up to staying up. Yeah. Well, it just blew my mind when he signed for them in January.
We're also forgetting someone as well. I mean, Benteke came in, 32.5 million.
Benteke was alright.
He wasn't too bad.
Didn't suit the manager's system. It was just a bizarre signing. I mean,
he doesn't suit
won them some
system.
points, though.
He won them a lot of points with his late goals, but the other good signing that we haven't touched on is Dimitri Payet, who, in a lot of ways, I think carried that West Ham side, because you look at their form when he was injured and out of the side, and they really struggled without his goals, without his set-up play through the midfield, and he was basically that player that transitioned them from that mid-table club to really pushing for the top 4. So it's going to be really interesting what happens next season, because I know he's made it pretty clear that he's not too fussed about staying at West Ham if another bigger club comes along. So whether they're able to sort of strengthen and build on this and kind of progress, or whether he drops his head or he gets his head turned by other clubs and ends up leaving or ends up staying but sulking, or what happens. But that's quite an interesting one as well.
They signed a few good guys, that Lanzini and Antonio. Yeah. And Antonio as well. So they won't obviously be in the top 3 or 4, but I think they were really good signings for him. Like, Payet gets the attention, but they were quite handy players. And now with the new stadium they move into, that and money shouldn't be too much of an issue by the looks of it.
And they've already looked to become a bit active in the transfer window already, with a few bids for, was it Lacazette that they went after?
Yeah, and is it Batsuya or whatever?
Yeah, who I think looks like he might be heading your way.
Yeah, one of the two. I think we'll get one and they possibly will get the other. It looks like they get after is it Carlos Bacca from AC Milan?
Yeah,
His
that
first
was the
name?
one that I was saying today. I think
Yeah.
DB was talking about him.
So yeah, that's big money for West Ham.
Big spenders, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk now about games of the season, and we'll start with I'll start with you, JD, and I'll get your favourite and least favourite game for Spurs, and then your favourite and least favourite game of the season overall.
Favourite or least favourite was definitely Newcastle on the final. I'd probably even say the first time we lost to Newcastle, actually, because that was just one of those old Tottenham games. We should have been 3 or 4 up, and they scored 2 goals in the final few minutes and stole it. Best game was winning away at City, mainly for the reaction after the game with Poch and the players going over to the fans, and it was kind of our first, win against another title rival. So yeah, that was probably most enjoyable. Neutral-wise, probably Leicester against City. I think that just kind of showed that they were going to be right up there. It took me a while to kind of believe that they'd stay around. But after that kind of, made me think that, they're probably going to do do the whole job. Least favourite would probably be any of the times I unfortunately watched United play this season.
Again,
which wasn't too often.
All my answers are getting stolen by you, Mob. I think you could throw a hat over most of the United games. Cooksen, are you able to pick out a favourite United game of the season?
Yes, it's just listing them. It's like Liverpool home game where Martial came and tore him a new arsehole, and Martin Skirtle has been shamed ever since. Let's see. We beat Stoke 3-0. That was an entertaining game, surprisingly. The Midtjylland game where Rashford kicked 2.
Was that
then
5-1 or something?
Rashford kicked 2. Yep. And where we beat City, where Rashford scored. Least favourite game, also winning the FA Cup.
Of course.
Least favourite game is everything else.
What about in the league as a whole? What was your favourite game of the season as a neutral?
Probably the Chelsea Spurs game, because it was just mouths all over the place, and that was just humorous to watch.
Oh yeah, I mean there's been quite a few entertaining games this season. I would say that City Leicester game was probably my favourite as a neutral, because that was definitely the game, as you say, JD. It was definitely the game where you started to believe Leicester could actually win the title, and some of the goals they scored were pretty outstanding. I didn't really have a least favourite game of the season. I suppose, as you say, any United game, any Villa game that I happened to watch that wasn't too entertaining. Was probably be up there.
Why were you watching a Villa game?
Well, it did actually just
asking for trouble.
It did actually just remind me that I have to correct myself on my favourite game of the season. I think my favourite game of the season was actually Leicester against Aston Villa about 3 or 4 rounds in, where Aston Villa went up 2-0 and then Leicester scored in I think just about the last minute with Dyer knocking himself out about to score the winner.
I remember that one.
I think Mahrez went nuts in that one as well, so that was a pretty entertaining game. You've just touched on it, Cookson, so we should probably discuss your FA Cup triumph. And typical United, it was in extra time after struggling to a 1-1 draw in normal time against Palace. What were your thoughts on that game in the context of Van Gaal getting sacked so soon afterwards? Could you sort of disconnect the result and Van Gaal's performance of the season, or did you kind of have some sort of admiration for him because of it?
Well, he did a decent job. Wasn't good enough, and he got sacked. You have to disconnect, really. I mean, most United fans felt the same. Still, it could be worse. Unless he didn't do an embarrassing touchline dance like Guardiola. So, but yeah, you just have to disconnect. I mean, he won the FA Cup, which he hadn't won for 12 years or something like that. And it was a youth player who scored it, who was introduced by Van Gaal. So again, there's a bit of a positive. But yeah,
So-
you have to disconnect.
How do you see Van Gaal's legacy at the club? As you've touched on, he obviously blooded quite a few younger players. Do you perhaps see 2 or 3 years down the line, when those guys are a bit more senior, that United supporters will look back and actually be pretty grateful that those guys were introduced into the side?
Well, his legacy, the way I see it, will pretty much be boiled down to signing Martial and introducing Marcus Rashford. I mean, it's the bare bones of it. I mean, kind of lucky in both regards, because Will Keane and Rooney got injured, and then Rashford comes in, and again with Martial, it was pretty much a ballsy deadline day move, but both turned out to be pretty successful. I mean, yeah, so probably the big legacy. I mean, it took Rashford less than 100 days to go from under 18s to Euros, so...
Scoring against Australia as well.
Yeah, conflicting moments, those goals.
On the other cup finals that we've had since the last podcast, we've also had the Europa League final and the Champions League final. Champions League final, first of all, tough for Atletico Madrid, falling on penalties to Real Madrid. How did you guys see that one?
Very boring and dull.
Yeah?
Yeah, if it wasn't a final, I think it would have been even more boring, but I guess you kind of knew that it was going to be quite a tense game. Especially, I think that's the way Simeone likes it. But yeah, I always thought that Madrid would get over them. There's just too much. I think they really started to improve as well under Zidane towards the end, so they just did look a bit stronger going into it. But yeah, that's number 11 for them now. So yeah,
And
they're a fantastic club.
Pepe managed to make himself look like an even bigger toss bag. That's somehow possible.
And I like him, but I could see how some people might think Ronaldo did the same. Putting himself fifth when, probably the best penalty taker in the side you'd want early on. I've always thought you'd want, just in case it doesn't get to that fifth penalty. But obviously he kind of wanted the goal-winning shot. So yeah, that's how I've heard some people look at it. And after his celebrations, the first time they beat Madrid in the final, and I think he scored the fourth goal to put them 4-1 up. Yeah, you could kind of see a little bit of a pattern there, but good on him. He's a fantastic player, and I kind of like it. I like the individuality about him. So yeah.
And then obviously in the Europa League final, Sevilla won their third in a row against Liverpool. There's the side plot there about Mamadou Sakho not being able to play in the game after the issues with that drug test. It's probably a question that I know an obvious answer to, but do we feel sorry for Liverpool at all, or are we just happy to see them lose another final?
Nope.
No.
But then commendations for Sevilla?
Yeah, I do feel sorry for him a bit, mainly because my opinion on the Europa League is the dropouts from the Champions League don't deserve to be there. And I think it's the second time of the three that Sevilla's won that they've done that. So, it's a bit... I do feel sorry for the sides that have to go through, and play in Azerbaijan and, the Ukraine runner-up, on a Thursday night. And then this side waltzes in the knockout stage and comes in and wins it all the time. So, yeah, that's the only part of me that feels sorry for Liverpool. Yeah, a player being there or not, that's life. That happens with injuries, and things like that all the time. So I'm sure they'll sue, and I don't know, who knows what they'll do. They'll make a protest and all stand up on the 5th minute or something at Anfield next season, but good luck to them. They've got nothing to do midweek next year, so they can come up with something clever.
Thoughts on Sevilla, Cooksen?
Well, they looked pretty good. I mean, Coke scored 2 goals. Kevin Gamario looked very good and has looked pretty good all season. I mean, Liverpool were good in the first half, but the second half, Sevilla just came in and dominated them. I mean, Liverpool's defence were, shambolic and comedic in the second half with some of the goals. But yeah, I mean, you start James Milner in midfield, kind of get that.
Fair enough. Well, we might wrap it up there, boys. Did you guys have any closing thoughts? Any big transfers that you're hoping to get over the line?
Hopefully Lacazette does come to us. I think he can be a good partner for Kane and also fill in for him on his own. And then I think the rest will be kind of obscure for us. Kind of like Kevin Wimmer and Dele Alli were the year before. So I'm happy to be surprised with who they come up with.
And how about you, Cooksen?
Get Rafael Varane or Marquinhos. Then maybe pop into Atletico Madrid and buy Saul or Andre Gomez. Just get some good midfielders, good centre backs, and also a right winger, like whoever's there. Maybe get Griezmann. Spend big.
Fair
Just
enough.
Get Woody flash the dollar bills.
Well, thank you both for coming on.
What about Hull? Who's Hull?
Oh, here we go. Yeah, before we sign off, look, I don't know, half the bloody team probably needs improving, but it's a difficult one because you look at the squad and you think most of that squad was there the last time we got relegated, and at the time probably shouldn't have been relegated. So you kind of flirt between wanting to do a Norwich and not really replace too many of the squad players, but you also don't want to make their mistakes and end up getting relegated again. So it's a tough one. I've just heard today that we've offered new deals for Huddleston and El Mohammadi, which I'm not too sure about. As depth they might do, but I'd probably be looking at least getting a new couple of strikers in and a couple of midfielders, but the club's kind of in the middle of takeover discussions, so I don't think we'll get too much news on transfer targets for at least the next week or two. But yeah, so it's all going to be quite interesting. A couple of interesting weeks ahead, I suspect, but at least we've got the Euros to keep us entertained in the meantime. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming on, boys.
Thanks for having us.
No worries.
Thanks for all your appearances over the season. Thanks to everyone for listening in. If you click the link below this one, you'll be able to listen to the second part of our wrap-up summary podcast of the season, where we'll go more into detail on the title race, the relegation battle, and also the playoff final that Hull won just last weekend. So hopefully give that one a listen as well. But until next season, we'll see you on the forums.